Welcome to the City Report Card with Bob Bernstein and Ashley Northington. The City Report Card is a Zoomcast where we explore Nashville through a different perspective aside from it being Music City or It City or any other kind of city except for the one we've lived in for a long time and seen change dramatically. Sometimes not always for the better. We decided to do this show after serving 3 years on the Chamber's Education Report Committee, where we learned a whole lot about how the public school district works, how it's funded, and what challenges it faces. After all of the interviews, readings, and discussions, our biggest takeaway was that we cannot judge the public school district without first judging ourselves. That means we can't point fingers at public schools without taking a deeper look at all of the other systems and institutions that connect to it. And that's everything from affordable housing to private industry to transit and mobility to the nonprofit sector. That's why we're hosting this series of conversations to explore the connections and the relationships in the hopes that we can make a difference. So who are we? Well, I am Ashley Northington, and I'm what Nashvillians call a unicorn. That means I'm actually from this city. I'm a fourth generation Nashville native, and my passion for education stems from the amazing experiences I had having attended 8 Metro Nashville public schools. I'm a graduate of Antioch High School, a former education reporter, state education department official, education policy analyst, and now I get to work with educational institutions across the country, helping them navigate their challenges and better connect with their audiences. I do this work because I know the tremendous value that education had on my life, and I want to make sure that other children have the same great experience. Bob?
I'm Bob Bernstein. I'm not a unicorn, and I'm not quite sure what I am, but I moved here in 1988, 32 years ago, to be a newspaper reporter, to write mostly about government and tax reform issues. After a couple of years, I realized that Nashville was something I liked more than journalism, and pivoted to become a restaurant entrepreneur, opening several places, including Bongo Java and Fido. I've had a long time interest in politics and education, working on many campaigns, starting when I was 10 years old. And I started getting interested in education issues in college when I started to realize how formal education I felt failed me. Over time, I pursued these interests to get involved in Nashville. I was a founding board member of Hands on Nashville and Nashville Prep. And I was a board member for Nashville's Farmers Market, Abintra Montessori School. And my wife and I have a son at Abintra and another right now at Hume Fogg High School.
Good, thanks, Bob. So today we have a real treat because we are being joined by one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, Miss Jessica Dauphin. Jessica is the executive director for the Transit Alliance of Middle Tennessee. The Transit Alliance is committed to building support for funding for a regional multimodal transit system. At the Transit Alliance, Jessica builds relationships with community and business partners, secures funding for programs, and oversees all educational and community engagement programs, including the transit, of which I am a graduate. In addition to her role at the Transit Alliance, she is the vice chair of the Transit Now Nashville Board of Directors. A Middle Tennessee native, she has a bachelor's degree in English from Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you very much. I am happy to be here and humbled that you even asked.
Did she freeze? Ashley for a moment. Interesting. Yeah. So I'll start the questions and hopefully she gets back on. If not, we'll have to start over, but I'll start and hopefully she can hear us. Ashley sent me your TED Talk, which I listened to this morning. And you make the case that public transit may be the thing that matters most to us right now here in Nashville. And it really made me start thinking, because I kept, to be honest, let me ask the question this way. First, I want to give you a chance to explain that to people who didn't hear the TED Talk. And next, I want to follow up and say, it was an interesting conversation. It made me think, because I keep thinking education is the most important thing. And I go further, and I want you to give you a chance to answer this. A couple of years ago, when we debated whether we should spend $1 billion towards transportation, which I think we desperately need transportation. But I questioned, if we're willing to spend $1 billion in transportation, why aren't we debating what else we want to spend $1 billion on? Where would it best be? And my answer is always education. So I want to hear from you why you push it as transportation.
Great question, and thank you for watching the TEDx.
It's definitely worth watching.
Thank you. I am so blown away that you admit that it made you think. I mean, that's exactly what someone hopes for when they put something like that out there. So that is just incredible, and you've made my year already. So if we had $1 billion as a city, I would advocate for it to go to transportation and transit, only because I see transit as such an intersectional issue. And I lay that out in the TEDx with 4 main intersections, mainly being health, environment, economy, and equity. And so many of the other issues, like affordable housing, like education, are tied to those intersections, right? So when transit supports better health outcomes, both individually and overall community-wide, supporting more active lifestyles, it supports better environment in terms of healthier environment, less CO2, less carbon in the air, less, so our asthma rates drop, healthier birth rates, all of those things start to domino effect, right? In terms of the economy, and I want to say that in 2020, what we saw is 10,000 essential workers relied on public transit during the pandemic. While most of us were able to pivot and work from home, there were thousands in Nashville who couldn't do that. And if public transit can keep our city moving and functioning during a pandemic, imagine what it could do for the recovery and in prosperity thereafter. And in terms of equity, transit is a public resource more than anything else. It's not a wish list. It's something that we have to have because individual freedoms are directly tied to mobility. And if I can't be mobile, then I cannot access anything else. Whether it's a job, whether it's lunch with my mom, whether it's education, whether it's getting my kid to their doctor or their soccer practice or gymnastics or whatever the case, groceries even. Like, I got to be mobile to do that. So anyway, that's why I would advocate for transit funding. And I would say this as a tag on beyond that is there comes a point in time where we just need to stop and reevaluate why we've been doing things the way they've always been done. And I say that in terms for transit because we have been funding transit the same way for so long, and our city doesn't seem to get any better for it. Even though we keep trying to move small pieces around here and there and all these other issues, we're still facing an affordability crisis, educational challenges, and other things, public safety. And I feel like it's time that we, and I guess 2020 taught us this too, it's time that we really stop and reevaluate what we're doing and why we're doing things, the way we're doing them.
Ashley's back, which I'm glad to see.
I am back.
I stole your first question, so you get number 2.
So when I think about public transit, I often use it to think about some of the things that you just talked about. I think about opportunity and I think about access. I thought it was important for you to be here because I think that when people think about education or transit, it's sort of like an either or proposition, as if they're opposed. There's not necessarily a straight connection, but I believe that it's more interwoven. Can you share a little bit from your perspective how a robust transit system might support public education?
Yeah, thank you. And I love the way you say interwoven. No, I don't think transit or transportation issues are at all diametrically opposed to any other issue. I think, in fact, it supports and can lift and help protect those other issues or make and improve them in some way. In that interconnectedness, we're looking at that gray area that I guess most of us are so inept at really evaluating well, especially as an entire city, right? But in terms of connecting transit and education, I wanted to put myself in those shoes, right? So you're looking at proximity, mobility, level of rigor at a particular educational rigor at a particular school, even sports teams go into the decision to attend this particular school in a city like Nashville with school choice. Right? Can I attend? My kid loves arts. I want to send them to an art school. My kid is super good at sports. I want them to go to a sports school, right? Where the good sports teams are. So many considerations go into this decision. The fact is though, if the preferred school is too far away and there's no reliable transportation mode, like maybe the bus doesn't go there, or mom and dad or grandmother or cousin or older brother, sister can't get me to school and back reliably every day, then I am at the mercy of my zoned school. It doesn't matter what I want or what my aspirations are or what the better school is for me. And all of that is because attendance matters. And again, that goes back to getting there regularly every day. If you miss too much school, then you're missing your opportunity for education. Again, if maybe the school isn't too far away, but maybe the student doesn't feel safe walking or cycling there, right? There's not protected bike lanes or sidewalks or what have you. Again, you're at the mercy of what the city has provided and what your circumstances are. Let's see. And and education doesn't just happen within a classroom, right? There's education that happens outside the classroom as well. I was thinking of job internships, externships, job training. Even during high school, kids are getting access to those opportunities. But if they're not able to be mobile reliably, then they miss those opportunities, right? So again, transit could really help build equity in terms of accessing those types of early opportunities for job training and college prep, access to libraries, access to sports practices, games, workouts. There's just, in so many ways, transportation, our ability to prosper and access opportunity really relies on our ability to be mobile.
Yeah, it's funny, on a personal level, I got hit with the equity issue on transportation this year when my eldest went to a private school, a Montessori school through 8th grade, and then entered the lottery and got into Hume Fogg. And at first I was thinking, this wasn't an equity issue. Anybody could apply for the lottery. Anybody can get in. He lucked out and got in to his first choice. And then I got hit with the transportation issue that somebody brought up, is that Hume Fogg doesn't offer transportation. And I realized how many kids were left out of even applying because they couldn't get there. And so then I started realizing that transportation has been used in this city to keep schools, in some situations, segregated. And it really hit me hard that I was participating in this with my kid. So I see your point. It was really interesting. for me personally.
Yeah, part of the reason that I went to 8 different schools is because of transportation issues. Like there had to be someone to take me to and from whatever school I was going to, and there had to be somebody there to watch me, once I got home. In my office in East Nashville, Meg's, a magnet school is right behind me. And the kids that go to Meg's doesn't offer transportation, I don't believe. But the kids that go there, they're riding the city bus. And so if you don't take the bus or your parents can't take you there, then Meg's Magnet School is not an option for you. But I like to, when I think about this, I think about it in a different way. So aside from going to schools, one of the things that we often talk about is like this whole city approach and making sure that families are okay, so that kids can be okay to go to school. And what we saw during the pandemic is that essential workers, like you mentioned, they are the ones that kept our city rolling. They had access to their economic opportunity. And we know that when the economics of a family improves, that kids have access to food, and their environment is better, and then they go to school ready to learn. So can you talk a little bit about the connection between transit and economic prosperity and how that might make a difference for families?
Yeah. I think that in a perfect world, economic prosperity wouldn't be a barrier for students, right? And I think that's why we're having this conversation, because we want to believe that there's equal opportunity. But as Bob just mentioned, we realize that there isn't. So what we have to do is think about in terms of providing these public services that help alleviate the heavy lift for parents and families that are challenged socioeconomically, so that the stress and strife that could get in the way and really prevent access to education and other opportunities are kind of moved aside, if you will. And transit can be a really big help in that, because as we've been discussing, transportation and the ability to be mobile is a huge barrier. Matter of fact, in seeking higher education for adults, even the number 2 barrier to accessing higher education is transportation. The number 1 is childcare. So when parents can't access higher education to get better paying jobs because they lack transportation access or reliable and affordable transportation modes, then they are stressed and not able to really provide the home life and the support for their children to overcome those same or similar challenges as they age. And I was thinking about that in your questions, whole city approach and pathways to prosperity. And it made me think about the entire interconnectedness and the accountability of resources that goes into providing a safe enough space for an individual child to learn, to access opportunities, and to make the best use of them. Childhood is stressful and just in the best of worlds, but when you are, or someone in your family is suffering a health issue or a mental health issue or food insecurity, or they've lost a job, or you're struggling to pay rent, I mean, all of the speed bumps and roadblocks that pop up along the way, especially for someone living paycheck to paycheck. And believe me, I know I spent more than half my life living like that. And it's not fun. It doesn't leave a lot of breathing room in your head for expansive visionary thinking, or what do I want with my life? It's more of, I've got to do this right now. And what's the next fire to prevent me from losing my apartment, or to help my mom, right? Because she didn't make enough money to buy food this week. So, and I know that I kind of got off a little bit on a tangent, but transit helps in that you can make those connections a lot easier. And if more, and I say this in my TEDx, Bob, but you might have caught it. when more people benefit from the economy and more equitable economic access, the more the economy benefits.
Yeah, I think what you said there at the beginning of that, and I agree with it, but everything you said. One, I keep wanting to make the point, then I'll ask my question. But the way you talked about transportation throughout this whole thing made me think about the way people talk about access to the internet. It's like if people don't have access to be able to get everywhere, it's the same thing we're talking about the internet. So that was really interesting. So that was one thing. But the way you said the two barriers to higher education are childcare and transportation reiterated to me why I believe in this whole city, with the term whole city, because that's really, if you think about it, if we're not going to help people get childcare and help get transportation, we blame the schools for poor performance, and that's bad enough because of all these other issues the schools have to deal with. Two, we start to blame kids or adults for not achieving. And if we're not giving them a safe place and a way to get there and the opportunities, like you just said, I don't, like you said in the intro, Ashley, how do you point the finger at everybody else if we're not going to look in the mirror and say, we pride ourselves living in a low tax state. We pride ourselves not having an income tax, yet that we complain about all those things we don't have here in the city. So that's my soapbox for a minute. So Ashley, I'll let you ask a question because I just needed to get on a soapbox there for a minute.
Yes. So one of the questions that Bob would often ask is, how would you advocate, since Nashville is such a low tax place, how would you advocate or inspire people to want them to pay more? Because every time we talk about raising taxes, people kind of balk at the idea. What would you say to inspire them or motivate them to want to pay more for these services that should be a basic right, like internet for all, like transit for everyone, like public education? What do you think needs to happen to push people into action?
Ashley?
I know.
If I really knew the answer to that, I would put myself right out of a job in some ways, right? But that's what I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find that how do we help people understand the value of these things, and maybe I don't use whatever the thing is that my city needs to fund, right? But here's a tagline that I've seen used over and over again for transit, and that is,
I'll say it for you because I saw your TED Talk, so I'm going to say, I'll say it. Some of us use it, but all of us need it. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, not all of us will use it, but all of us need it for all the reasons we're talking about. And it really boils down in a lot of ways to this idea of more equitably resourcing our communities and our individuals. Right? It's one thing to say, okay, I've got $100 and I'm going to give everybody $10, right? But if everybody I hand that $10 bill to is not in the same state of need, right? And to simplify or to oversimplify, really, if we wanted to just resource neighborhoods and we decided to give every neighborhood the same exact resources today, that's not necessarily equitable, because right now today, some neighborhoods have been historically under-resourced, right? And they have so many more needs than others. I'm thinking, Bordeaux, North Nashville. They have been historically under-resourced and disinvested in, as opposed to a neighborhood like Valmead, for instance. And to give both of those communities the same amount of resources starting today would be inequitable. So we have to think a lot more intentionally about the resources we are investing in and where we're investing them, right? Because if in a neighborhood where most families have 2.5 cars, they're probably not going to need access to transit so much, as opposed to a neighborhood where they have like 0.7 cars per household. Right. So that is also one way in this whole city approach to really sit down and think. And this is my whole thing, Ashley. I'm all about purposefully and intentionally making these investments so that it does work best for most, if not all of us.
So I'm gonna totally change gears here and say, how does somebody with an English degree get into transportation?
Yeah. Well, I got into nonprofit, and in college, I started a nonprofit at MTSU, a nonprofit student group there, and just something inside me. I don't know why. I guess growing up really poor or something made me want to fight for the underdog and fight for those, for things, for be a voice, basically, for things I saw that were amiss or needed addressing. So I got into nonprofit and women's health, and just went from there. Social change organizations, that kind of thing. And when I was offered the job here at the Transit Alliance in 2017, I did a lot of soul searching, quite frankly, Bob, because I was like, my personal brand is not transit. I don't know a thing about transit. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a planner. I don't even know how to talk about it, right? But in my research, what I found was transportation issues affect women and communities of color more so than men, white men. And that fell right into my brand. And when I was able to connect it with me and it resonated with me and the work that I had been doing for a decade already, I was able to really embrace it. And that's when I knew that this issue of transportation, this issue of transit, is how Middle Tennessee and Nashville specifically will define its priorities for generations. We have got to get transit right. This is not a time to kick the can. This is not a time to gloss over it. This is not a time to shortchange it for all of the reasons that we've discussed.
I love that. I didn't realize until I read your bio that we had some similar things in common. I have a degree in English too. And on the outset, it doesn't seem like that I would be as invested in transit as I am. But the reason that I care about it so much is because my whole life is about trying to figure out how to get more people of color, more Black people specifically, on a pathway to prosperity. And I know through being an employer, when people want internships or jobs, and they can't get to my office because they don't have a car, but then they can't access prosperity. One job, I always tell this story. One job candidate asked me to buy them a car, and they wanted to work for me for free to pay the car. It was like a $1,500 car that they had found. And this person had come from DC, and they were so desperate coming to Nashville, where they did not have the ability to move around as they did in DC, couldn't access opportunities. And they thought that I was nice enough and wanted to know if I would buy them a car. So it's really, really important as it relates to the prosperity of community. It's about access for me. So I'm glad that you shared what you said.
Can I tag on to that just real quick?
Absolutely.
This is one of my favorite, or if you can say it, that about this, points to make. And I say it in the TEDx: an economy that presumes, assumes, or is built upon your ability to have a personal vehicle is not an equitable economy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It is not. It is really prohibitively expensive to own a personal vehicle for many people, okay? And for many employers, especially in Middle Tennessee, we rely on folks to have their own car. And as Ashley just said, it is sometimes impossible for people to even participate because of that. First hurdle. I can't even get to the internship. I can't even get to the job. How am I supposed to access any further opportunities beyond that without that mobility? And that's why I say individual freedoms are tied to mobility.
Oh yeah, I recognize this as a small business guy. I had an employee paying Uber every day, paying about $12 to get to and from work. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're working the first 2 or 3 hours for free just to pay Uber. And he never even looked at it that way. He just kind of looked at it like, okay, this is the cost of him doing business. And I'm just like, I'm like, I don't want to lose you, but you need a job closer to home, or you got to find another way to get here. It's kind of crazy. So, okay, so here's a question I'm asked pretty much every guest, and I have to reword it a little bit for you because you're not talking from a strict education perspective. We call ourselves the city report card. So we want to give the city a grade. So what grade would you give the city in terms of equity?
Oof. Not a good one.
I just see Ashley doesn't want to be asked this question.
She's even on mute. She's like, I got to stay out of this. It's not good, Bob. I don't know. I think a C would be too rosy. I would say D maybe. I think Ashley might even say F, but I'm not a person of color. I'm just from the outside of communities of color, and I can see it's probably about a D in reality, and maybe even worse. Because like I said,
not just from a transportation perspective. What else are you looking at when you give it a D?
Well, you look at other public services and resources, right? Even as mundane as trash service. Do you know what I mean? I was hearing Councilmember Toombs talk about in her district in North Nashville, they have backups of trash pickup. You know what I mean? I don't ever have a backup of trash pickup. I mean, it's like, again, it boils down to we're not equitably resourcing our neighborhoods based on their particular needs, because there have been decades and generations of disinvestment in particular neighborhoods, particularly communities of color. I'll make a quick reference, probably not good to drop this bomb and move on, but when a few decades ago, when I-40 was built through the Jefferson Street neighborhood, it devastated that community. It took out all of these Black-owned businesses, and then they weren't able to start back up. Right? I mean, it's a history of it, and there was never amends made to help those businesses restart, reconnect those communities that were split to each other, back to the city, to economical opportunity. I mean, and that's just one instance, and there are many more. Germantown. I mean, there's, so in terms of equity, I'd give the city a D, and I feel like, and I may be biased, but I think investing in better transit would be an excellent first step because of what it offers in terms of accessing economical opportunity, educational opportunity, just opportunity to participate and be in the city.
Yep.
Ashley, have you recovered that?
Yeah.
When I asked that question, so are you back?
I'm back. I wasn't ready. I didn't know that you were going to phrase it that way.
I wasn't quite sure either. To be honest, I didn't know how I was going to phrase it. I was kind of like, that word just hit me there at the moment. So
good. That gives me something too. Like, y'all didn't even know what y'all were going to say. So how could I be prepared for that answer?
Right. This is totally fine.
I could not study that one.
Right. So I thank you, Jessica, for agreeing to talk with us. And the last question I'm going to ask is, you know, we often talk about how to make Nashville a child-friendly city. You know, what are the quick 1, 2, 3 things that you think intentionally funding a robust multimodal transit system, how could it make Nashville more child-friendly?
Great question, Ashley. Absolutely. Nashville needs to be a more child-friendly city. I have a 7-year-old now, but a few years ago we lived in West Nashville. We wanted to stay there, but my gosh, there's just not a lot of child-friendly stuff downtown in the city at all. We had to move out to the suburbs just to get some green space. Do you know what I mean? To find, I don't know, restaurants with child seats, you know, it was kind of ridiculous. But I would say the way a robust multimodal transit system really helps help support a child-friendly city is that you have to think intentionally about your design and safety for all. And I'm sure that all of us feel this when we're out on our roadways. Much of Nashville's roadways were built with cars only in mind and the car safety in mind, right? Not those who walk or bike or ride transit or whatever else. So when you think intentionally about a multimodal transit system, you're really thinking about all of the users and their safety. So that can help make a more child-friendly city when I can go bike with my child on the roads in the city because they're protected and there's sidewalks that aren't cut off with a tree in the middle or a sign in the middle or just broken up and just end into nothing. But they're connected. Maybe to greenways would be an excellent way also to help intentionally design our multimodal transit system, connect these sidewalks and bikeways to our greenways, make it so we can really navigate our city in whichever mode we choose, but make it safe and safe for families. Strollers can go on sidewalks, can go on greenways. In that. So I think that a really well-intentioned designed multimodal transit system really supports a child-friendly city.
Perfect.
Great.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for agreeing to talk with us today. We got a lot of insight from you. We explored the interconnectedness, so hopefully more people understand why transit is just as important as public education. So thank you for agreeing to visit with us today.
Really
Thank you for
enjoyed it.
exploring this connection. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode of the City Report Card. See you next week and goodbye for now.